All right, so let's begin. Hello, everyone. My name is Manoj, and I'm the host for Living Podcast Season 3. And today with us, we have a very special guest. I'm pretty sure you might all know him. He has been in the industry for as long as you can remember. We have had his name on our books as well as in our lives dedicated. So please, gentlemen, welcome Scott Robertson, the author of one of the most famous design books. And Mr. Robertson, how are you?
I'm well. I'm well. Thanks for having me on and making me sound old. So
Not really. No, I mean, you have been a very, very
it's,
huge name for all of us. Every time I
it's true.
say,
Yeah, I'm getting old though. It's true. Yeah,
so, Mr. Robertson, most of our audience are basically students, but some of them are very new to the industry, and some of them don't really know how to get around and how to get proper guidance. So, would you please introduce yourself to our audiences?
sure. Yeah. First, thanks for having me on. Expect we'll have a nice chat today. Uh, let's see. I'm just to give a couple milestones. I went to Art Center College of Design. Graduated in 1990, so I'm 33 years out of school. And then along the way, I've been an educator, first at Art Center Europe in Switzerland for a year and a half. That's where I started my educational path. And then eventually back at Art Center. Then Art Center transitioned into being entertainment design chair for a while. And then I also started a publishing company, so Design Studio Press. We now have over 100 titles published on art and design, including some of my own. And then have also done quite a bit of freelance work over those 30 plus years. More recently, I did a stint with Apple for 3.5 years, which is kind of when I disappeared. I sort of stopped all social media and sort of everything outside while I was working for them. And the last couple of years, I've left Apple and now I'm back to doing, I'm actually dedicating all my time, not all of it, almost all of it to old school industrial design practice work. So I'm doing a lot of green tech work, helping to realize inventions of small engineering group. So I take those ideas and refine them and help them get those into production with a bunch of companies all around the world. So I'm doing that. And then I also have a very, very strong interest in creative tools, which I think stems out of my time at Apple. And so I'm heavily into VR, and mostly Gravity Sketch in that space. And then also fascinated by machine learning and how it can be used ethically and in an interesting way for industrial designers moving forward. So I think that's the short summary.
Wow, wow, wow. Like I'm a bit impressed now. You've moved all the way from automotive industry and really explored design in every single industry possible over the last 30 years. And that's really great to hear. I mean, as a designer, it is expected, from anyone that you should be able to design any sort of product. Because at the end of the day, car is also a product, whether it
Yeah, it is.
whether you
Yeah.
consider just the seats or the entire car itself. I think, yeah.
Yeah. What makes that possible, I believe, is that first, it's a way of thinking. So if you understand that when you're in school, you're learning how to learn, and that you will never stop learning, then you have the tools to adapt to any different subject along the way, because you know how to approach the research side first. So and most importantly, you know how to ask the questions that quickly make you, let's just say, expert enough, right? Not a full expert in the subject, but um, you can comprehend the problems that need to be solved by asking the right questions. And then if you have a very strong set of honestly foundation skills that give you the ability to communicate ideas to others, then you can almost contribute to almost any subject, right? So you can get in there and you can say, what if this, what if that, and then you can just be, you can observe for a while and then you can start to come up with, positive impact for lots and lots of different subjects.
Yeah, that's true. It all, I think it also allows us to explore the other industry and other criteria of those industry, but expertise of our own, and could really help us enabling the connection and to bridge the connection between it. Because in the what recently we have seen with
Yep.
companies like Polestar, where they include industrial design into the automotive industry as well as product and graphic design as well. This is like a recent example of what we can see if we bridge the gap between different industries and start exploring the opportunities where we can design a product that is a combination of different industry and have a lot of categorizes in them.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. And it's not just one very specific. You can be a specialist, but you can also be a generalist and take into consideration and be aware of a lot of different disciplines and try to learn as much as you can about those along the way. And graphic design probably being, I think, one of the most important if you're an industrial designer. Um, yeah, and then it broadens your opportunities, really.
Yep, that's true. That's very true. All right, so I want to start with the beginning, with the reason why you have been famous all around the world. Your two of most successful publications, one is How to Draw, and the other one is The Age Point. So these are the two books that I assume every design student has along their journey, and they have used it for the guidance or to learn or in some way to explore the industry itself. But what I want to know is when you were writing or researching for these two books, what were you expecting students to learn out of it, and how do you think it could help guide them in their journey?
Okay, first, the H point is authored by Stuart Macy, not me. So I did How to Draw with Thomas Bertling. With Thomas Bertling, but Stuart did H point. I was just the publisher of that book, and then helped out with some copy editing and proofing things like that. But that's all Stuart's book. But they do complement each other, and I do promote his book within How to Draw because they're sort of our companions. If the specific topic is automotive design, then his is much better for that. As well, definitely the engineering and packaging because that's the focus of that book. Um, okay, so what was the question again about the? I can answer about How to Draw.
Like, yeah, about how to draw, how you think it could help us guide, or what is the right way someone can learn from that book?
I think that I think for learning anything new, an individual has to have several different areas of, let's say, emphasis or focus, and so it's not just any one thing. It's kind of a bit like being a good chef, and there's a bunch of ingredients that you need. So first, I think is a healthy dose of curiosity. And so first, I think you have to be curious enough about the subject to have the desire or the want to learn more about it, right? And I think that curiosity, if you can carry that throughout your entire career, it will always keep you motivated and energized and interested about anything you're pursuing. So curiosity, I put sort of as number one. Number two is probably determination. So the curiosity is kind of what grabs you, right? Oh, that looks interesting. What is that, right? Could I possibly do that, right? That's the what comes out of the curiosity is the that motivation and desire. But next, when you settle down, you're like, okay, yeah, that is okay. Yes, I'm going to devote some time to that. I want to learn that skill set. Then it's about determination. More than it's not talent; it's determination, right? If you get in there and you methodically learn over time to master each one of essentially those chapters, let's say in the context of How to Draw, that by the end you will be able to put together those skills, right? And even though it won't feel like you're any better at the end of every chapter, right? If you get to the end of the book, then you look at the drawing you're doing, which still you may not be happy with, but if you compare it to the very first drawing you did, it's way, way, way better, right? Even though you still have the same feeling that there's so much left to learn. And that's actually the key is that it's true that there is so much left to learn. and that you still continue to learn. And I continue to learn to this day. And I'm still learning and exploring different applications and different techniques and, different modes of thought. So those are my two first really big ones, right? Curiosity and determination. You put those together, I think you've got some superpowers. Then the latter two are more about how to absorb the information that's presented to you in a new way, maybe a new idea. So I think you have to always have an open mind towards learning something new, which in a lot of cases, for some people, means admitting that they don't know everything, right? So if you think that you're kind of let's say you think you're a know-it-all, right? That means a lot of times you have a very closed mind to things, ideas that may not be exactly the way that you perceive the world, right? So you're now closed to any new information that might help shape your skill set and your character, right? Because you don't have an open mind. So I think part of it, you start with the curiosity, but then to absorb the information is you have to have an open mind at first, right? So that's the sort of say number three. And then the last one, whenever you're learning a new skill, is to be patient. And so this is very difficult especially when you're younger and you're eager and you're like, well, all the answers are there. I can see it. And those other students did those drawings. It's like, mine don't look like that. What is going on? This book is rubbish. It doesn't work, right? And throw it against the wall. But that doesn't help, right? It's not helping anyone, especially yourself. So the key is to be patient. So whenever I'm teaching myself a new skill set, whether it's from a YouTube video or a book, right, I try to lower the expectations of the results while allowing myself the ability to practice and learn. So I don't say, okay, now I'm learning at the same time I want to produce beautiful results. It's like, no, that's counterproductive because there's no logic that says when I'm first learning something, I'm going to make amazing content, right? It's like, no. It's like whenever you're learning a 3D model, there's a reason they always start out with a teapot, right? The classic 3D model to model. It's like there's no design to think about. There's no styling to think about. It's just how does this app work, right? Same thing when you're learning to draw, you're learning to design, you're learning to render. Same exact thing. It's like lower the expectation, right? And then be patient with yourself to give yourself time to just learn, right? And don't have an expectation that anything in your first sketchbook is going to be something you want to show anybody. It's just for yourself, right? It's just to learn and explore and broaden your skill set. And so I think if you start with the right mindset, give yourself room and time with some patience and you're determined, you'll get there.
All right, they sound like pretty good deal. Yeah, I think one of the most important thing that students tend to overlook is the patience thing. They are always impatient because they're young. They're the
Oh,
age of 19, 20, they're young. They just want to get there as fast as possible. I myself has experienced that.
yeah. It
Yes.
helps. It helps the motivation and the energy, right? But it
No,
doesn't help with
no,
it
it
doesn't
takes a
help the
big toll
mental side.
because you always don't get satisfied with the result if you have those kind of expectations from yourself. And it took me a year to realize that after, a lot of failed projects and everything, I realized I
Yep.
have to be patient. And unless and until I don't get where I want, I just have to be patient and keep working hard, practice again and again and again until I get close. Yeah. So, Mr. Robertson, you mentioned that you were in Europe for educational purposes. You were teaching students. So, I assume you have a lot of extensive background when it comes to being an instructor or being a professor in the field of design. Tell us what is something that you always notice in students that they don't notice in themselves, something that over the years have been consistently the same thing about them, and something that you also found in yourself when you were young.
Well, I think it's probably the point you were just talking about is the impatience, right? And I think that the impatience leads to an unhelpful level of frustration. Um, so I think that's one thing to try and just be aware of. I think just being aware of your impatience is enough to help it settle down a little bit. It's not that you'll ever become patient, but you just realize like, oh, maybe I'm being impatient about this. Maybe So I think that's sort of been a pretty consistent thing because of youthful energy. Same with myself when I was in school. Um, the other point is that I think the in-class dynamics, it's a little different if you're learning from a book or you're learning in an online course where you don't have the in-class dynamics. But I think it's really important to realize that the social dynamics of the group you're with, and that you have a bunch of different designers, students, they all enter a class together, and pretty quickly you see who's doing the best work, in the first year of work, the first term, even first 2 weeks. You see, the first time homework goes on the wall, you're like, oh, yeah, that person's really good, right? That person's not so good. So what I've seen over time, though, is that remember you all start off at different places, but you're all in the same curriculum, and the ones who start off strong oftentimes build an attitude around their abilities that they came to the school with, right? And so, as a result of the attitude that they form, and they might have had quite a healthy ego coming in, right, to school, is that um, they tend to close off sharing of ideas and techniques and skills and knowledge early because they're trying to protect that social standing in the collective group. And where you see this other students who are in the middle of the pack, let's say, that are very determined, very curious, have a very open mind, and they start to share ideas with each other, right? Because they're sort of on an equal playing field and they're sort of in the midfield, and they're like, okay, yeah, let's team up. How did you learn that? How did you do that? And pretty soon there's this group, middle and below, that start to work together and they start making discoveries, right? And they have this mentality of this openness with no ego, and they're friendly with other students and they start to share ideas. All of a sudden, those things start to multiply, right? And then, you get about halfway through the curriculum, like say it's a 4-year program, you get 2 years in, and now everybody in the middle and the bottom have started to catch the person who started really at the top. But the person at the top kept their ego, and now they're not part of this group, right? And then by the end of 4 years, right, this whole big group has equaled and now maybe passed the person who started out really strong. And this person doesn't have the sort of social networking strength of this group, right? And so understanding the value of those friendships and being willing to share knowledge and skills and ideas throughout is really how the rest of the career works, right? It's not like you go off and you work as an individual in the profession. You all work as a team. And so the earlier you can learn to be open and share ideas and techniques and skills to elevate the people around you in your class, right? The more inclusion you get into the social network, which will be your professional network for the rest of your career. So I think that at sort of the base level, most important thing is be nice to people, and respect their viewpoints, and realize you're all learning together, even though you may start at different places. It doesn't mean that's where you're going to end
No,
up.
yeah, that's true. The types of students that you defined, with the categorization and everything. Yeah, I think that's right. In my first year of college, I pretty much experienced all of that. I've seen and noticed there are like, some students with a certain type of skill set that they're already mastered in, but the other skill set that they have never even experienced. So, yeah, I think it will be a very good idea for them to work on this cooperatively along with other students. Because, as you said, teamwork has to be there until the end of the career, because you never design one thing alone.
Yeah. And the other people that are maybe in the middle that have what's called great soft skills. Soft skills are the ability to work with people and communicate with others, right? Where do they maybe gravitate towards? They're real fans of design. They know design history, but maybe they're not a great hands-on, desktop, designer. Well, maybe they gravitate to management, right? Because they're great at orchestrating teams, working with lots of individuals, getting the best out of people, right? Well, who does the hotshot end up working for in the company? Oh, they end up working for the manager, who was the person that in the first year they treated very poorly, right? And now this person, right, dictates their day-to-day skill, job requirements and tasks. So, don't it comes full circle.
That's true. That is true. That's a very good example. Yeah. So, yeah, and I assume when you were a student, you also had some kind of similar experiences and similar environment.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just natural. Those class dynamics. We for some reason though had a very, I don't know what it was with our class or just the time that we were in school. It was we had what we'd call friendly competition. So it was super competitive. If you weren't pulling one all nighter every week to put up the most amount of sketches on the wall, you just weren't going to be there with the leaders of in the class. But at the same time, it was very friendly competition. It didn't feel cutthroat, and so we were able to elevate what it felt like to me, elevate sort of the entire class, elevated their skills together, and as a result, everybody's skills went up. Maybe I'm romanticizing my time in school, but it did feel more like that. And I'm still good friends with many of those classmates that I had back at Art Center.
That's great. That's really great. So, other thing was that during your career, you were also a concept
A
artist,
little
right?
bit.
Could you tell us more about that and how was it relevant at that time and is it relevant now?
Yeah, I mean, it's as a job, it's totally still relevant because look at feature films, games, animation, theme parks, toy design. Those are kind of the five categories. Um, they all need content, right? They need product. So who's going to imagine those worlds? And that's the job of a concept artist or a concept designer, is to imagine those worlds and flesh out everything in it. And then with each project, there's an emphasis maybe more on environments or characters or costume or vehicles. So each project becomes different. You load it up with different strengths, concept artists that are better at certain skill sets that's needed for the script or the project. And so yeah, I mean, it's totally way more than it was when I graduated. When I graduated, it was not a career, right? The people from my class were the very, very first ones who actually tried to make a career doing concept art. There didn't exist. It wasn't a thing. There were a few illustrators on some feature films, but games when I was, graduating were bitmap, right? They were all like 8-bit cubes, right? You didn't need a concept artist to do that. And so it could be done by engineers and programmers. And that's how it started, right? They did all the art as well. So yeah, it's only grown actually to where now it's become a full fledged career where you could go to school for it. You can go to several colleges around the world to study entertainment design or entertainment art, as it's sometimes called, if it's a bit more like background painting for animation, or animation leans heavily or more heavily on illustration skills, and feature films and video games lean a little more towards industrial design. So yeah, but it's you can go to schools and you can graduate and go get a job, right after graduation, doing that as a career. So yeah, I think it's totally, tools are changing for sure, but the career it's definitely still a need to build a world. For sure, it's a skill needed.
Well, that's great. We have seen, recently rise in many animation movies where they hire specially designers to design products such as cars or buildings or the architecture. They have, a specialized team for that that just have one job to design the environment and the product.
Yeah, there will always be specialists for the hero prop or the hero character or the hero building, right? So, but generally speaking, if you have great foundation skills, you can contribute enough to any one of those skills or any one of those topics that you can work.
Right? Seems cool. So, like recently on Instagram, we have seen a lot of designers. I think you have also done this. What they do is they put their sketch on Discord and then they render it out based on some kind of prompt that you give. And I was looking over it yesterday and for the last few days. And one of the things I noticed is that this is only being used as designers, but not by different brands. So, do you think this type of application by artificial intelligence has a big role in the future with automotive companies?
Yeah, I mean it's whether you're a fan of it or not, it's here. It's not like it's a question if it's coming. It's already here. It's already being used. So to
Hmm.
correct you a little bit, if you go to
Okay.
their website and you scroll down, you'll see all the brands that are already using it in their design departments. So
Okay.
it actually is being
Marketing and
heavily
everything.
used by
Yeah.
brands, but they're not allowed to publicize that, and they can't show any results because it's all
Hmm. So they
secret
won't
work.
show it until the product
Yeah,
is
it's
released.
all well, it's their design content for production in the future, right? So it's already being yes, so it is already being heavily used in most of the automotive companies, shoe brands, products, all that sort of thing. So right now, I've been working with Viscom actually for the last couple of years, um, doing product testing and helping them to sort of, you know, so I'm just asking the questions about could it do this, could it do that? It would be good if it could do this for industrial designers, and and then also working very diligently on trying to retain the authorship of the designer and artist, and work on the ethics side of the data set training. So a couple of things. One, it's very different than the prompt based um, text to image generators, right? It's very different than Stable Diffusion and Midjourney and those Dolly, those sorts of things. This is very much about trying to retain the um, essence of your sketch as much as possible. And it will get better at doing that, but it's right now that's what it's about. And so, you know, I always put in my sketch and then I run it at 100% influence. I want it as close to my sketch as I can get it. Um, and because what happens is, if you lower the influence of the sketch, what you're leaning towards is the data set training, right? The data set training is the same access for everybody using the data set. So you don't want to skew towards this end because now you're going to get the same result, right? You're moving towards the middle, basically. Everything familiar, everything we already know. You won't find innovation by lowering the influence of your sketch, generally. So you want to keep the sketch influence up. Um, Now that data set they use is a royalty-free data set owned by Shutterstock. So Shutterstock has cleared all the images. Their diffusion model is trained on that data set, right? So that's not the large language model data set that the was it Lion, I think is called. That's not it's not using that data set. Um, so you can feel good that the data set it's trained on is copyright cleared, royalty free data set that's managed by Shutterstock, right? And it has to be for all the corporations to use, right? So it's licensed from Shutterstock. So that's a totally different training set than all the other generators. Then they also train on about 30% of it as images they've created using non AI tools. to give it something a little bit special, and that takes theirs, to another level of usability for industrial designers. So right now, I see it as an amazing sort of accelerator to take a design idea and quickly visualize it and say, should we spend any time making a model of this? Right. So right now, you still have to go to model. You still do it. You need all the math to make all the tooling, et cetera. Right. So it's really, how fast can I go from sketch idea and retain all my proportions, balance, and my intent, and just have a quick look. Right. And then maybe once I master the app, I could actually start to make some original discoveries using the app as well. That's a little bit, your prompt craft, your sketch, how well does it communicate, all those sort of things. So right now, I think it works great for the front end. And it gets you, like, if you look at the rendering, if you really download it and look at it, you're 80% there, because you got to explore some colors, some materials, but the reflections aren't right. The wheels are always wonky. It's just, it still requires a decent paint over to take it. So it's kind of like, yeah, it's weird. It's kind of a photoreal sketch, right? So it kind of is about.
It's like someone who's trying to imagine it, and then they're explaining it.
Yeah.
But instead of explanation, it's a drawing.
Yes.
You can't fully convey it, but it's something there.
Yeah, it really helps you realize, yes, there's something to pursue. Let's do a paint over with this intent, right? Or that looks pretty cool. That has potential. Let's go build a model, right? So I see it, but it's weird because it's photoreal, right? And that's because the data set is mostly photoreal. And so, you're going to get the influence of the photography training. So it's kind of photo bashing your sketch at a really high level, and quite often high enough that you can make the decision, I want to paint over that and present it, or I want to go build a 3D model, make it even better, right? So I think that it is a tool. Companies are already licensing it. They're already training their design staffs how to use it. I think it is just, it's something you should know how to interface with prompting. You should know how to interface with an AI model, a machine learning model. You should know how to direct it, right? It will be a skill set like marker sketching, Photoshop rendering, 3D modeling. Now add AI, image refinement or sketch refinement or rendering to it. And when you're using it, it feels more like a render engine than the other text to image generators are a bit random, right? And that's really just relying on the magic of the prompting. Even if you put in images to influence it, it doesn't really pay attention to them that much. No, Viscom, though, is the only tool that's, I think, sort of built properly from an ethics standpoint, and really retains the proportions, the perspective, right? And it really shows if you don't know how to draw too. And now you just get a photoreal version of something really out of perspective and misproportioned. It's not going to help that, right? And then when you want it to help that, what does it do? You have to lower the influence of the drawing. And when you do that, you end up back over here in the data set, which is everything we already know and we've already seen, right? So it's the first AI tool that makes me want to draw more and draw better. So I think how to draw.
It gives you the thought that, my sketch is not good.
Yeah.
So now I have to improve it, because you see how it visualizes and you're like, that's crooked. I have to start again.
Yeah. It's like, why doesn't that look good? And you're like, well, look
exactly,
at your sketch. That's why it doesn't look good.
That's true, because I think 2 years ago when I started Viscom, at the time when it was only black and white sketches, only grayscale sketches.
Yeah.
I started using it and I'm like, that's shit, that's never going to work. And 2 years now I've seen it's a huge difference of what they have accomplished. Last year I was talking to Jordan Taylor, the CEO and the founder of Viscom, and he explained to me that it started initially as just a sketching engine. Then we implemented the ability to render it with colors and more photorealistic. And in the future, they're planning to include more industry into it, such as fashion, such as apparel design, interaction design, architecture. But for now, they are started with industrial because I think industrial design is one of those places where you have to get things right first and then visualize it. You can't just let AI do the whole thing.
No, no. So I think it's a pretty amazing tool. Of course, I have a book called How to Render, and how does that stay relevant into the future? And I was thinking about it, and I have a very open mind about technology and new tools, and so I'm like, well, this like clearly I'm trying it, and it works. So this is the way. I can't imagine now doing it another way, better and faster. I can't compete with it. So, but the knowledge in the How to Render book about how to first recognize the shortcomings of the render that gets output, right? So, for instance, the lighting, the surfacing, the values aren't right to communicate the form in your sketch. A lot of times they're flipped upside down. And so you're like, so first you need the knowledge of how to evaluate the result, right? And so I think the fundamental knowledge within the book gives you a great skill set or base to edit the results and know how to do a paint over. So how to correct it, basically. It's just like that last 10%. And I can't imagine that if I put two people using the same Viscom tool with their initial sketch, and one person didn't have the foundation rendering knowledge, and one person did, that you wouldn't want to have the foundation rendering knowledge because that extra 10% really makes all the difference. So, it's like, okay, yeah, it's totally still relevant, even just now as a paint over tool. The other way it's totally relevant is when you start prompting more specifically about lighting scenarios with a goal to communicate a mood or a feeling or reflectivity or matte surfaces, right? Those sorts of things. So you need the knowledge of how to talk to the algorithm with a language that's more like a rendering engine and traditional rendering. And my How to Render book is really written more like a rendering engine, right? It uses all the same terminology as rendering engines. And so, and that's because it carries over into 3D more easily, that you're like, oh, I know what that term means. I know what that does. I'm going to apply that here in the 3D model and get the render result that I want. Well, as Viscom becomes more of a rendering engine, that language that you learn allows you to communicate with it. You may not be doing the hands-on blockout anymore. That you might send that off to the Viscom, rendering bot, and it'll send it back to you. But you need to know how to tell it what to do. And that comes from a core set of knowledge.
No, that's true. Because even at the end of the day, if you see artificial intelligence, it's still an intelligence of its own, but it relies on the data that has already been provided. So we have to still give some input on how it
Correct.
can go through that data and create an output of its own. So we still have to put our hands on the wheel. Like one hand should be our own, one hand should be of AI. We have to steer it in some direction.
Totally, you have to steer it. Yeah, yeah. And then I get that all the time, that like, comments online with the experiments I'm sharing. They're like, well, mine don't look like that. It's like, okay, well, go back to the first. What's your drawing look like? Okay. And then what are you prompting? Right. And it's like, well, if you're prompting ridiculous things that, I'm not prompting anything that references the real world as it relates to car brands or people or anything. I don't want anything known. I just want the rendering stuff, right? I just want the color, the material type. I want the graphics. I want the lighting. I want the view, right? I'm just like, those are all the base things. It's like I'm just arranging the rendering in my mind. I want it to be this view. I want it to be in this environment. It's this type of object, and I want it to be this color. And I want the glass to be see through, and I want the lighting to be cinematic and foggy, right? So that's
Hmm.
more. It's more how I prompt.
Yeah, you have to really define how you want. It's like you're God and you're trying to figure out how to create a scene where you have to define everything. You have to define the amount of fog, the amount of sunlight, what kind of obstacles are placed around the way. Are there any buildings? Are there any hills? Is it standing on a road? Is it standing on a tarmac or anything else? You have to define everything.
Yeah. Yeah. And the other thing you have to remember is that it will never give you anything futuristic,
No. Oh
right?
yeah,
It's
no.
not it's not a prediction machine, right? It only gives you things
Yes.
that already exist in reality, right? You can't ask it to say, "Give me the world's best futuristic Ferrari." Like, no, no, no. It's
It
not.
will give you a Ferrari that is already there, something similar, but not a futuristic
Exactly.
what you're expecting.
Exactly. It's not a prediction machine, right? It's just clusters of photographs that are tagged with text, and it's going to pull from those clusters of photography of real stuff, right? And inform and try to mesh it into the your request. But and occasionally you get lucky and there's some interesting twist, but you don't get it by just thinking it's a crystal ball. That's not how it works.
All right. So, yeah, as you said, for the artificial intelligence, we have to input a more realistic data that already exists instead of something futuristic or cyberpunk type of thing, because it will not work as we want.
Yeah, I was even trying to do like a when I was testing
Hmm.
Midjourney out of curiosity, I was testing
Hmm.
doing a Rivian. I have a Rivian SUV, and what's interesting is that
Hmm.
when I was prompting a Rivian SUV, the training for the data set, it was the older one, didn't contain any Rivians at the time, or there was no pictures
Yeah.
of the Rivian SUV in any sort of significant volume, right? So you couldn't get you couldn't get realistic any sort of
Yeah.
representation of that vehicle because the data set was 2 years old and it didn't exist for that
Hmm.
um, in enough volume or popularity to even get its own little cluster, right? So that's an example of you can't. It's not a prediction machine.
Yeah, that's true. So it entirely depends on something that already exists. I mean, I had that experience myself because in one of the projects, the prompt that I entered was a futuristic truck in a Tron Legacy looking background. And it just gave me some boxes and some blue lines. And I'm like, I should have written it more clearly. So yeah, that I mean, to get to know this tool, we have to have a lot of, experimenting, a lot of different prompts
So
to see whether how we can get around with this.
yeah, so what you can do if you want to do like a Tron Legacy background is you describe the background in the context of light, shadow, reflectivity, material rendering, right? You don't tag it as Tron Legacy. What you do is you describe it based on the aesthetic, right? But you need to know all those descriptive terms of how to break it down, not by the name of a movie, but by the description of what it looks like. And that can start to work.
Yes,
Yeah.
by the environment. Yeah, that's true. That's true. So it's basically, a rendering engine where we have to input literally everything else, and what it does, it visualizes exactly what we are trying to imagine. Basically, it just saves a lot of time of turning a sketch into a render and to help you
Yeah.
visualize whether is it really worth looking forward to finish the project, or should we improvise it a bit here before going to the modeling part and everything else.
Yep.
That's great. That's really good for with scoring. And yeah, so in your career, you have been instructor, you have been consultant, you have been a concept artist. You have played the whole game of a designer all around the industry, all around the world for a long time. All of this, what do you think was the best time that you had related to design where you thought this will not work, but it turned out to be a really good time and a really good, hard work that you did, the best thing that you have accomplished so far?
Well, I like to think I'm still working on that part about the best thing accomplished so far. Um, I don't know. I mean, it's hard when you're doing stuff that goes all the way to production. There aren't that many surprises, because there's so many steps along the way. You have a pretty good feeling, about the manufacturing process before a company spends a lot of money to manufacture something. Um, I want to say I think it was about 12 years ago, we did this generative shoe mapping where we took images in Modo and we would project them onto a 3D shoe model. And I think when we did that, and we had like a bunch of different UV map types, and so depending on the map type you chose, we had like a little editor slider where you could, change the UV repetitions and you could change the orientation of the projection, and you would get graphically a different looking shoe every single time, right? And then you could set up an animation, and each frame would be a different iteration of the map on the shoe, right? And I think that for me was falling into the realm of sort of like magic and very surprising results that I could not have predicted. Um, I think with the traditional steps of drawing, Photoshop rendering, 3D modeling, prototyping, early production models, your proof of concept, and all the way into production, I think that each step is kind of a little small step, and so you're not really very surprised each step along the way. But when something is so dramatic as going from a blank gray, shoe model to something full color with graphics that looks photoreal, and it rendered overnight, and I came back and there were like 60 shoe concepts for me to look at in the morning. That that was surprising, and that was magic. And that was we did that in '01. That was 12 years ago, for Columbia footwear. So that was like, oh wow, this there's potential for things to be done differently. And so I think Viscom now kind of grows out of that same sort of idea, this idea of this generative, you know, assistant that helps things. And now I have oftentimes run experiments where my jaw drops when I see the result, right? I'm like, wow, I did not, either I didn't expect that interpretation, but the result is super compelling and it stirs my curiosity, right? And that for me is the biggest positive out of using any of the AI tools for imagery is that it like super energizes your creativity. It gets the what if question just going like so strong. Oh, what if we did this? What if I changed that word? What if I put in another image? Let's try it with this sketch? It's like, and I'm digging through my flat file finding old drawings. It's like, oh, I never got to render that one. I'm going to throw it in there and see what happens, right? And so now you're like, wow, I'm like super energized from these sketches that are 10 years old, 20 years old, and now I see it and I'm like, oh yeah, that's cool. And what if I do this and blah blah blah. And so now I'm like super energized. So I think that's probably the most shocking and unexpected thing in the last decade is the ability for these tools that seem at first to be a huge threat to our own skill set to actually be hugely energizing, um, and motivating to do more of what we already did before, like drawing, right? Like Viscom, I find to be super to draw and improve my drawings because now I know if I don't draw the full wheel in the sketch, it's not going to render it, right? And if I don't include the ground plane, yeah. So now and so I've been very fortunate because I always drew all the wheel and I always put it on the ground. Right? So I always in all my sketches had the connection of a wheeled vehicle to the ground with a shadow. And so now when I put them in, you're like, oh, awesome. It totally works. But I put in, and I can imagine though, I was just in my mind imagining all the students around the world that only like to do the top half of the wheel, right? And just let it float to nothing with no shadow. Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
That's good for aesthetics, but as a sketch point, I think there should be a full eclipse.
It's not going to work. Yeah, you need the ellipse for the AI to work. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and then you start to like, and then to try and fix it, you start sliding back into the data set, right, to make it more familiar. But when you do that, you lose your
And
step.
be like, that is not something good, not something new. It feels like it's already done before. So then you put the slider back onto
Yeah,
the right,
because it
and
has
it's like,
been.
it's fucked again.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, so in that regard, that's been a surprise, so I think that there are
Definitely.
many more of those to come, especially as we get into the realm
Hmm.
of 2D going into 3D, into the future.
Definitely. Oh
3D
yeah.
is probably is the next big hurdle. I would say that the 2D side is already done. It's here. It's being used. It's licensed. It's into companies. The data set has been cleaned up with it.
I think it is like a base of 2D is already formed, and now it's time for 3D to have a proper base where you can rely trustfully on anything that already is given,
Yeah,
and you can work beyond that. Yeah, I've
yeah,
had that some experience as well. Recently, I started working with Unreal Engine as a rendering software, which I know is a game development software, but it gives
yeah, yeah,
such
yeah.
realistic rendering. I was blown away for the first time. I can see every little
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
reflection.
It's been used. Yeah, more and more by concept
Yeah, definitely.
designers use real time rendering. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very amazing. So I think 3D has a great future ahead. And talking about great future, you happen to mention that you have some experience in virtual reality with Gravity Sketch and stuff like that. So could you tell me a bit more about that? Because I'm not really familiar with Gravity Sketch and virtual reality in the field of design.
So um, so
Mhm.
when you work in 3 dimensions, you are modeling
Mhm.
in space in stereo vision, right? So depth perception, when you have stereo vision, depth perception, we can use parallax shift. We can
Yeah.
immediately know where a point is in space just by moving our hand, right? So when I'm modeling, I don't need 4 views to
Yes.
move one point in space. Right? I don't need to go check the top view, check the
Yeah.
side view, right, to know where it's moved.
Mhm.
I just go like this. I just grab the point and I move it, right? And I know where it is relative to my body. So I think the
Mhm.
number one first advantage when you jump into a 3D space, which is just like reality, right? When you're in Gravity Sketch, is your ability to
Mhm.
manipulate a model surface in 3 dimensions all at once, right? With the connection to your human body, just by moving your hands, you know where the point went. You can't do that in a perspective view on a flat CAD screen, right? If you've ever tried to move a point in space, you're like,
You have to look at from all the
yeah, and
orthographic
then you go to
views.
the
Is
other
it
view, and it's
working?
like,
Is
where
it
did the
there
point
yet?
go, right? And it's like,
It's way beyond. Exactly,
yeah,
yes.
it's
So
way
if you
back
work on
there,
the X
right?
dimension, you have to check again with the Y and the Z axis,
Correct.
and you have to do it again and again. Oh, that is so stressful. Yeah.
Yes. So in that regard, I think there's it's super intuitive. It's much like more like if you're doing a vehicle, it's much more like working on a clay model, right?
Mhm.
So that feels really good, feels natural. You know where you are in space. It's less of an abstraction than working on a flat CAD screen
Okay.
to simulate 3 dimensions,
Mhm.
right? So there's a huge disconnect actually when you try to work on a flat screen to simulate 3D. But when you're in the space with the actual object,
That's
you're
true.
already just there in 3D. So now you've entered that 3D world, and everything I move and manipulate in that space feels incredibly natural
That's
because
true.
that's how I manipulate my own space and my own world. So that's a huge leap, I think, in the context of being able to work fast,
Mhm.
efficiently, and intuitively. More importantly, um, so that's kind of like the big number one realization, I think, when you jump in. Um, Number two is a little bit more abstract, but um, when you engage your body um, to interact with something in a 3D space in VR, your your
Mhm.
ability to retain a memory of that surface or that object or that experience goes way, way, way up. Because you've engaged your body and your brain, it tricks your brain. Your brain basically believes that you actually experienced that space, right? So your brain, because it's so real, it's in 3 dimensions, it's in perspective, it's stereo vision, it has, spatial sound. You're actually in that space having that experience. So what's called spatial memory, your spatial memory is significantly stronger when you engage with an object in 3 dimensions. And so I know I've built many houses in VR space, right, in Gravity Sketch. And then I tour the house and walk through it 1-to-1 scale, right? I can, weeks, months later, I can remember the experience of that space, and I could actually draw from memory more about that space than anything I've ever modeled that was flat, right? Or that I did from a drawing or a rendering. And so there's a huge plus side, but it's not like a really something you recognize immediately. You have to spend some time in it, but your spatial memory goes way up. And then the recall of the experience is super powerful to help you, bring that object back to life. Those are my 2 big ones.
It sounds so cool to be, being able to experience this thing so close and up personal compared to what you can do physically. Because I can't imagine, standing and then just drawing a line, the silhouette of the car, by just standing there. It sounds a bit unimaginable to me, but imagine if you could do this in real life as a student in colleges. Because at this moment, I don't think every college in the world has the opportunity to, put these things into the students' curriculum. Because I think at this stage, it's still a very much an experimental feature, an experimental tool in the design industry. Correct?
Yeah, it's not.
No?
People are using it professionally all over the place. It's, again, just like all the companies are already using Viscom. So, look, there's a headset right there.
Yeah, I noticed. The first thing I noticed was like, that's an Oculus. I know that.
I don't even really ever use that one that much because it's a Quest 2. I find it a little bit heavy and not as comfortable as the older
So which one do you
which
use?
is I use the Rift S actually on my PC.
And how was your experience with it? Like, do you sort of recommend it?
Yeah. I don't think you can buy them anymore. I think they're out
Okay.
of production. You can probably get them used on eBay or something, really cheap, probably. They're not they're not as sharp, the focus, but they're lighter, and you can tether them. Well, they are tethered. You can't run them mobile like that one, or untethered. But because it's tethered, it's faster. It has more compute power, and I can dedicate one entire video card
Is way
specifically
better, yeah.
just to the headset. So the performance is way better. So from a performance standpoint, the Rift S for me is the sweet spot. And the current, the Quest 2, well, everything's come out since then has gotten heavier, more uncomfortable. If I tether it for the
Yeah.
performance, it uses the same video card as my main monitor, which means the video card fan is running all the time. It's like it's like each one gets worse.
Yeah. Yeah, that's not good. Wow. Yeah, I have to try sometime. It seems so cool.
You have to try it.
Yeah, I definitely have to.
I mean, the app is free.
Yeah, exactly. You just have to get the
The app is
device.
free.
The app, you can get it for free on any platform.
Yeah, get with get with 3 friends. You buy one
Exactly,
headset.
yeah.
And you just trade
Wow.
it.
Seems like a great idea. Yeah, I will definitely do some experimenting with it before I graduate. I think it will serve as a really good standpoint for me to help me get a better perspective on my own design and my own projects and products.
Yeah, and you never stop learning, right? And you always keep learning.
Exactly,
on your own.
yeah.
Don't wait for other people to
Yeah.
say, oh,
Yeah,
just
and
you're
now,
not
yeah,
ready for
that's the
that.
point. If you want to do it right now, just get things done.
Just
You
do
know
it.
that- Yeah,
Do it. Jump in.
totally. So, yeah,
I mean, the worst thing that will happen is that you'll learn what you don't know.
yeah,
Right. So then you'll go back and fix your drawings and fix your sketches. Like with Viscom,
exactly.
right? You put in the current drawings, like, what is not happening? Oh, well, Yeah, you need more of that, unfortunately, right? It's like, oh, okay, I get it. So no, you never stop. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Over and over and over again.
So you never stop it. You keep on doing it again and again and again. That's true. Well, Mr. Robertson, that's been a wonderful conversation with you. I had a really, really great time. Came to know a lot of things about you as well as about the industry, some really, really cool things. But before we head out, I just have one question to ask you. In this day and age, we have seen a lot of increase for the number of students who opt for automotive design, transportation design, or industrial design compared to what it was at your time. We have seen a lot of students because the career has expanded a lot. So, what advice or what type of guidance could you provide in short way to help those accelerate? The ones who are at the bottom level, as you said, to accelerate and deep dive into the industry with more passion and more interest.
Um, I think a lot of the things I already said about learning, of course, those
Mm-hmm.
are sort of givens. But I think what it takes now to, and it's easier now than it ever has been because of the internet, and you can engage with a worldwide
Definitely.
audience, right? So you have a huge advantage compared to what we had. We didn't have the internet
Mm-hmm.
when I graduated, right? It was not. I mean, the internet may have been there, but it wasn't. Couldn't put a portfolio up. Like there was no interface. So just your collection of your class.
You were limited to the area where you
Yeah,
were. Like if you were in the United States, most of the time you can only compete with the people who are in the States, not someone from Japan or not someone from Europe. But
correct.
now we see, because of the globalization, I'm now competing with someone in Japan whose face I've never seen, but I've seen his work.
Yes. So yes, you're competing, but also you're also getting the option to be hired.
Yeah,
So it works
yeah.
both ways, right? So there are many, many, many more employers now, and it seems like every other month there's a new car maker, right? So um, all those
Definitely.
car makers need designs. So that never used to be the case when
Yeah,
when I was
exactly.
graduating. I
Yeah.
mean, we had the big three, right, in the United States. That was it, big three, and then you got maybe four in Europe, and that was about it. And a couple, two out of Japan as options. Um, so I think yes,
Mhm.
there's an opportunity for networking. Is my point, right? So you need to engage
Mhm.
and start to become a part of that community at a global level. So that means probably putting your portfolio on all the whatever it is now, Behance or ArtStation or whatever, wherever you want to post it. Then you need to start to become,
Yeah,
part of the conversation. So you need to start to be, contribute to the community in a positive way. So first and foremost, be pleasant, right? Be nice, because if two people come in the door with equal portfolios
the pleasant
and
one.
one of them is really pleasant to be
Exactly. Yeah,
around, right? And one of them
yeah.
has an attitude, right? Well, who gets the job, right? Oh, the person we want to be around. Yes, 8 hours a day. I mean, this you're like stepping into our family here, and our, we're not going to jeopardize that ecosystem and that environment. Even if somebody has slightly better skills, we'll take the pleasant person. We'll take the nice person.
Definitely. We need
Yeah.
someone who we can collaborate with, we can communicate with very ease because we've been doing a lot of projects with them for years, maybe decades, who knows.
Yep.
So I think that
Yep.
goes a long
And you
way.
also know that if they have an open mind and curiosity towards learning, if they're a lifelong learner,
Mhm.
that, oh, well, we can just
Yeah,
teach them,
exactly. Yeah,
right? And they'll still be pleasant. And we can teach them how to do those things.
it will not be a bad experience per
No,
se.
no. So anyway, those would be my guiding points. Just be nice to people.
That's great. That's really true. I think that will go for a long time in anyone's career or industry. Well, Mr. Robertson, it was great being able to share this 1 hour with you, having a conversation with you that will, help a lot of students and a lot of our audience around the world. Thank you for being part of this journey. Thank you for being at our guest, our host, audience, and being, a designer to this world for the last 30 years. Thank you for writing those books. Thank you for publishing them.
Yeah, thanks.
And yeah, I hope you
Yeah,
have
thank
a
you.
great time ahead. I hope you still keep drawing and help people as you have been doing.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Inktober's coming up. Yeah,
Definitely.
Inktober's coming, and Viscom's got me
Yeah, I think
inspired.
you're pretty busy now.
So maybe so. Now I'll be drawing for more,
That's great. That's really
Viscom
great to hear.
renderings. So yeah.
So yeah, I think with that, I'll wrap it up. I've been Banajitani and Mr. Scott Robertson have been our guests for season 3 of Simply Being. Thank you everyone for watching and have a good day.
Bye bye. Thank you.